So we just first want to just introduce who Compassionate Ko'olapoko is, and then we'll move on to introduce our wonderful speaker today. So aloha everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We are Compassionate Ko'olapoko, a collaborative initiative founded by partners representing the Castle, Kailua, and Kalaheo complexes of the Hawaii Department of Education, as well as Windward Community College and the Harold K.L. Castle Foundation. The Compassionate Ko'olapoko Steering Committee began during the fall of 2019 with a shared purpose of helping Ko'olapoko become trauma-informed and better able to support youth and their families. We are guided by the wisdom of our kupuna, community leaders, families, and educators. Compassionate Ko'olapoko's mission is to strengthen a culture of caring. In other words, we aim to cultivate a flourishing, thriving Ko'olapoko where the youth and their families are resilient and compassionate so that they can take care of themselves and others. We accomplish this by ensuring our school communities are trauma-informed and responsive. This event is funded through the generous support from the Novo Foundation, Education First, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Nale Aloha Foundation, all of whom we send a heartfelt mahalo. So I am Gail Silva. I'm the Educational Officer for Compassionate Ko'olapoko, part of a team that includes Nathan French, who is on the call with us, Artis Eschenberg from Windward Community College, Derek Minakami, who's not here today in another meeting. Hopefully he can jump on at some point. And our newest member is Kumu Bella Finau Famuina, who just joined us as our resource teacher. And I'm just going to let her jump in and say a few words about herself, and then she's going to introduce Dr. Kukahiko.
Mahalo. All right, Evelina Maikako, everyone. Mahalo nui for joining us. I know you guys are super busy people, but I know you're here because of this guy who's on your screen. And so we thank you again. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with Gail and the other people on Compassion Ko'olau, but most importantly with our community here in Kaneohe and Ko'olau area, Ko'olaupoko. And so I'm so thankful for all the relationships that I've been able to build, and now that I can be in the community with all of you. This is just beautiful and exciting. So mahalo nui. I'm going to say Dr. Kealiʻi Kukahiko. He did not introduce himself that way, but if it's okay, Kealiʻi, this is Dr. Kealiʻi Kukahiko. And I just want to read this a little snippet because this is how he identifies himself. And if you got to register, you saw his beautiful ohana. He is the great grandson of Makena, grandson of Nana, Kuli, and Kahala, and now, of course, an amazing father and husband on Kea'au, Moku o Keawe. He says he's a lifelong learner, and Dr. Kukahiko, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he currently does amazing work at OHE, which I know he's going to share a bunch of that with all of us today, and still a kumu at University of Hawaii Manoa, Department of Ethnic Studies. Is that correct? Kealiʻi, awesome. More importantly, I think in our conversations with Kealiʻi, you know, this idea of using mo'olelo as a navigational process, I hopefully will allow us to listen to the things that he's going to present, the amazing data that he's been able to do to extract from the research that he's been doing, but really to have critical discussions regarding the circumstances of our Indigenous people in Hawaii and about total well-being, how to create, you know, spaces in our educational systems where our kids are not being funneled, our Kanaka kids are not being funneled to the prison through these pipelines, but rather to these other spaces where we know that they can not only, you know, change perhaps a trajectory of where they had once been headed or where they could have been headed, but definitely where they could contribute to the greater good of Hawaii and the world, really. And so without further ado, I am going to turn the time over and say a big mahalo to Dr. Kealiʻi Kukahiko. Mahalo.
Mahalo. I am super humbled to be here, and I have not heard doctor in front of my name so many times in one message, by the way. Holy smokes. You know, funny thing, this morning, getting ready, and my wife comes out of the room and she says, so I'm in the lua, she's in the bathroom, and you know, just going through social media, and Kealiʻi, I just saw a picture of our family, and I'm wondering what's going on. So apparently she saw the announcement for today, and then she wanted to know all about what it is that I'm saying and who I'm talking to and this and that. But then she says, okay, how much of my life are you going to tell today? And I was like, well, you know, you are me, I am you. So probably a lot of it. She's like, well, that's really what I want to know. So just because, you know, she had to make a big deal about it, I'm going to start with a story directly related to her. So yes, I technically am a doctor, although I do not use that title much. I think part of it is I realized after getting my PhD how much I don't know and how much I would like to know. As a matter of fact, when I finished defending my dissertation, someone contacted me. I don't know, but they were like, they wanted to interview me because I was going to be the only Native Hawaiian male to graduate with a PhD in higher education that year. And at the time, I didn't think it was something worth celebrating. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm not going to my graduation. And she says, this woman, she says, yes, you are. And I says, why? She says, you think you're the only one that sacrificed? So what do you say to that? Like she, you know, as she often does, she put me in check pretty quickly. And I think it's a good introduction into our topic today, because oftentimes when we think about the change that we want to see in the world, a lot of the times we make, I don't want to say excuses, but we spend a lot of time justifying why we are not qualified to participate in that change. You know, for Native Hawaiians, no matter how much cocoa you have or how much cultural knowledge you've gathered, how fluent in Olelo Hawaii you are, there's always something that doesn't qualify you in certain spaces to participate or to contribute, yeah? And so this is what I have to offer you, just one perspective. Whether you come today as a parent, as a grandparent, as a mahiai, as a educator, as a you know, a mental health specialist, I hope that this process not only helps you to navigate in your journey of a'o, or your journey with others, that you can see the unique contributions that you bring to that work, that you are qualified and in fact have kuleana to be in that va'a, and that you can hold value and make space for others to be in that va'a with you. So here we go. So mo'olelo as a navigational process. We can simplify it by looking at where, why, what, how. Again, think of the multiple roles and responsibilities you carry with you today. Maybe you're not just an educational specialist. Maybe you're not just a mental health specialist, but you're also a husband, a brother. These are the types of questions we should be asking ourselves. Today, I'm going to take you through some of the data within the Department of Education, just to provide some context, but I'm hoping to engage with each of you into conversations on how these types of things apply in the navigation of your work, okay? So where have we been? Where are we going? Why are we going there? What indicators tell us we are on or off course? How do we arrive at those waypoints towards Kahiki? For me, this last one, how do we arrive at, it used to be, how do we arrive at Kahiki 3 years ago, when I was tasked to come up with a theory of change for the Office of Hawaiian Education. And it was always Kahiki, Kahiki, Kahiki. And then my boss, Kealiʻi Sang, reminds me, not reminds me, it was like ice cold shower in the middle of like a perfect day. She says, Kealiʻi, you know, I have no misconceptions that I'm going to be around or alive when we get to Kahiki. And I was like, huh? But I want to see Kahiki. I want my work to show results. I want to see outcomes. And she's like, well, you know, and she's definitely like, you know, long game. Yeah. Like sees 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. But sometimes we need waypoints. We need those short-term, medium goals. We need some wins. And so I think that I've kind of re-articulated that so that as we go about this process, we can celebrate those little wins on our way to Kahiki. All right, so those are kind of very conceptual: where, why, what, how. So for Hawaiian education, please get in the va'a with me and we journey kind of what education looks like in Hawaii from this lens. Where? Okay, so when we look at where we have been and we look at learning, an indigenous ontological framework, this process of knowing and being, we generally talk about 3 parts of 3 components of this knowing. Axiology would be the morals and values that dictate how we interact with reality. So if I'm very interested in money, I'm going to spend more time doing activities that accumulate money as opposed to, say, maybe I have to sacrifice time with family. Okay. If I want to be a great student and I'm spending more time studying than maybe going out partying if I'm in college, right? Methodology are the ways that we collect information that tell us more about our reality, okay? They're the reasons and the hows. Epistemology is what we know about reality. And then the idea of this open ontological framework that you see on the top is that indigenous peoples, Native Hawaiians, but generally indigenous peoples allow those 3 components to inform one another. What we've seen with Western education is that this core priority, if you will, to create objectivity, to dehumanize, to think about things without our own framework of values, without our own ways of knowing that come from our home or our culture or what we take as truth and fundamental as part of our reality. Those things have become disconnected, okay? And they didn't just happen, right? You can call it colonization, but we see when we take a look at you know, John Osorio's work, for example, on dismembering Lahui, we can see a number of policies and events historically that has separated this open ontological framework, right? 1825 sumptuary laws. Now our kupuna and our kahua no longer intermediate between what is right and what is wrong. Now a book of laws do, right? In 1840 Constitution, these are laws that shifted to protect property rights over human rights. These are laws that now replaced ali'i in the intermediation between Kanaka and law. In 1848, we have the Mehele, which transitioned land tenure to fee simple. We have the Kuleana Act that really redefined us as a people in our relationships with the land, right? That we were no longer maka'ainana, but ainahoa, like tenants, not the eyes of the land anymore. We're now tenants of the land. 1850 residency laws, those allowed foreigners, and I mean foreigners that refuse to naturalize, refuse to say the oath of loyalty to Hawaii. Because once in the kingdom, if you were naturalized citizen, you were a Hawaiian citizen. But we're talking about, these residency laws that allowed foreigners not only own land, but to hold public office. And now we start to normalize this idea that foreigners have the right to govern us. We now no longer even hold our own sovereignty within a nation, that we have representatives of other nations holding on to that sovereignty and controlling that sovereignty. And as I go here, just kind of, you can put these little marks if you want to in these overlaps of axiology and methodology and epistemology, but we can see that these start to deteriorate this open ontological framework and create what's on the bottom is this closed ontological framework. The 1875 Reciprocity Treaty, that was supposed to be a one-year renewable contract that allowed the United States military to use what is now known as Pearl Harbor, right? But what it did more fundamentally, as we looked at, you know what, we're going to take your sugar, right? It was just at the end. It was during the revolution and I mean Civil War, and it allowed sugar to come into the United States free of tax, but the caveat is that it had to be refined in California. A lot of folks don't know, but CNH sugar stands for California and Hawaiian sugar. Sugar has still never been refined in Hawaii. It has only been allowed to be refined in California. And why is that, right? We start to ask ourselves, why is something like that such a big deal? Well, the US didn't want to have to compete against its future territories for industrialization, right? It doesn't want Hawaii to be able to sell refined sugar to the rest of the world. It wants to, extract natural resources and profit that way. And so how does that, again, start to chip away at when I talk about sovereignty, I'm talking about intellectual sovereignty, not just political sovereignty. I'm talking about intellectual, I'm talking about cultural sovereignty, all these ways that we determine whether to maintain or change our circumstances, according to our desired intentionalities, right? The 1887 Bayonet Constitution, we know about 1863 naming law, that's something interesting, right? That our kupuna really only had one name. And then it wasn't until the introduction of the Naming Act and then the naming law, because no one was paying attention, that we were forced to take on English first names, and then we would take our father's name as our last name. And so why? What was so important about this naming law, right? It's a method, it's a methodology of what, right? It became the method that we would pass on pass on land. It became the method that by the time 1920 came around, and we decided that 50% blood quantum would be the minimum standard for Hawaiian homelands. It wasn't until then that we really started to see this colonial method that began to take Hawaiians off land, off Aina. So yeah, and here's an interesting thing. I don't know how many else of you are. Maybe you can, if you know how to put up a thumb on your emoji, or you can just show me your thumb. How many of you have participated in this cultural tradition, or know others? But my brother and I have T English names, and then our Hawaiian name was second. So I did the same with my children. And most of my generations, as far back as I can follow, did the same thing because we thought it was a Hawaiian tradition. But it was this law that was in effect until 1978. So over 100 years, we were forced to use this method of naming. Yeah. And so, I don't know, thumbs up, people know other people at least that did the same as me. I don't want to feel like the only guy that did that. Okay, And then 1896 English only law. As you know, in 1840, we had our own public school system before most of the world powers. At the time, I think we were one of 3 world powers, or one of 3 countries in the world that had public education across the board. We had 91 to 95% literacy rate, the highest in the world. That ended with the 1896 English only law that only funded schools with English mediums. There were over 200 schools at that time. By the time 1902 came around, there were no schools left in with Hawaiian mediums. Okay, so this is just to go about this understanding where our learning was, where that 91 to 95% literacy rate came from, and then what happens after this shift to an English medium, right? So this is where we were. Where do we want to go? Well, we want to go back to that 91 to 95% literacy rate, where we believe there were best practices and best standards being utilized, where people, place, and purpose was part of the learning, where learning went to and from the home to the classroom and back again, right? That learning and or teaching and learning, didn't just exist between the classroom walls. Okay, so that's where we've been, where we want to go. Why? I want to share with you just a 1-minute video. I think oftentimes, again, this is about mo'olelo. Why does capturing mo'olelo, why is it important? And one of those things is there's nothing that I can quantify to equate to this messaging.
But with the current housing issues and lack of housing for our local communities, we've thought about moving, but I refuse to move because of my children's education. I am determined to stay here and make it work so that they can have this education that they chose right through until they decide that they're complete. You know, one of them wants to potentially go and continue his education like Kamana has, through Olelo Hawaii in the secondary education. And so it's my job as a parent now to allow my kids to see through those dreams, rather than tell them, I can't afford to live here, we're gonna move somewhere else. You know, we talk about, as a community and a culture, we talk about revival of Olelo Hawaii, revive the language, revive the culture, but how do you do that when the very place that you're in makes it so hard to survive that people are leaving left and right? So I only hope that, you know, the Department of Education and the state sees that this program is nothing but an opportunity to do just that, to revive Olelo Hawaii, to revive the culture, you know, and to really help. And this is I just feel like this is just the starting point, and that there could be so much more growth for this, and that it could start bringing in people from, you know, across the Pai'aina, up in the upper 48, where they live now. I know so many people that wish they could come home and wish that their kids could be a part of Kaiapuni learning or Olelo Hawaii or anything, but there's no access.
So I'm not sure whether this specific mo'olelo resonates or is relevant to your work and what you do specifically. For us at the Office of Hawaiian Education, when we ask ourselves, okay, we want to take Hawaiian education, we want to root it to Hawaii so that students aren't always looking and at standards of success that reflects somebody else somewhere else doing something else, right? How do we ground them and allow them to be proud of where they come from and apply those lived experiences to their learning? And so that's what the why looks like for us. I just want to take a minute to for you to think about your work and what you do, and maybe not only just your individual why, but why folks should get into the va'a with you and paddle and do the hana. So I just want to take just a minute for us to think about that. And as we do, I want to share with you a quick story. I taught this race and education class at UCLA, and I remember one student, she just shares with me, she says, Professor, you know, you ask us to do these critical reflections and, you know, race is really hard for me to talk about in our groups. She's like, you know, when I see a protest, I'm like the student that walks way around. I don't want to participate in that. And I said, okay. I said, my goal for you is to master your narrative, to know your mo'olelo. Because at some point, whether you are a parent and that wants to see more for their student at school, or you are, you know, find yourself the victim of some type of injustice, but that when that day comes, that you will be able to communicate yourself in a way that connects to others, right? And that's what that why does. And unless we share that why, then we're not able to make those connections. Yeah. So I would love to hear, just if you could, I ask you to kind of think about your why and your collective whys. And so as soon as we kind of go through the last two parts, which is what and how, I would love to hear that. So what? Again, we talked about what are the indicators that suggest we're either on or off course, yeah? And so this is some data that looks at Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders across our Department of Education here in Hawaii, right? NHPI students, only 35% met proficiency standards in language arts. Only 25% were proficient in math. Of the 4 racial groups that maintained the highest rates of suspension, all of them were NHPI. NHPI students are 4 times more likely to be suspended. NHPI special ed students are 7 times more likely. And NHPI male special ed students are 9 times more likely to be identified for discipline and suspended. NHPIs have the largest gap in college aspiration and participation. So our juniors take a mandatory ACT test, and there's a college aspiration question. 78% of NHPI students said they wanted to go to college, but only 45% actually enrolled. NHPI students in Haido have the highest rates of suicide and suicide attempts in the US. Now, the next couple of slides are some slides I borrowed from Bella and Gail. Hawaiians, while they only represent 25% of the population, represent 37% of the child welfare cases, and nearly 45% of those in foster care, right? And those aren't even going through some of the other NHPI student populations. One of the big things that we've been looking at as a state is loss of learning. And so when we looked at NHPIs in the DOE, they had in every grade, in every core 4 subject, the highest loss of learning. And when we look at comparatively, they're at least double to 3 times the loss of learning rate. So while everybody participated and was impacted by COVID, there was an inequitable outcomes between NHPI students and non-NHPIs. So here's kind of some of the questions that I'm going to ask you about your own areas of expertise, okay? But let's take a look at them from education for now. What are the assumptions we have about those outcomes I just showed you, okay? The biggest one we know is economic advantage. When we look at policies for the last 20 years, economic advantage was assumed to be the leading predictive indicator. And so all of the policies, therefore, all of the educational initiatives were trying to deal with economic advantage. And here's the plus. The plus is economic advantage is assumed to be something that we really can't fix. So if that doesn't get better, it's really not our fault, right? Here's another one. The only thing we can do is equip our students to earn higher incomes to protect them from these outcomes. So that's a major thing. When we look at market-based education, we are creating curriculum that will hopefully provide our market economy with the labor that we value. So we're basically putting like dollar signs on different types of literacy, right? We obviously know that STEM is getting more money than arts and music, right? For example, another assumption, market-based education will create equity, right? So I do want to take a second here to relate it specifically to trauma intervention. What impact do these assumptions have on educational P4? So we call P4 because we're talking about practices, projects, programs, or policies. In 2020, there was a trauma-related initiative. It had $5 million. It also had the assumption that economic advantage was the leading indicator, but it restricted students. It was restricted to students who did not have medical insurance. So what are some of the assumptions that we have therein, right? One, that assumes that families with medical insurance, regardless of race and culture, have knowledge or the inclination to access other means of trauma-informed care. Or it assumes that students are provided access to other trauma-informed treatment programs to their schools and whose services are completely covered by all medical insurance and providers, right? These are the types of, well, these are the types of assumptions that heavily impact our ability to deliver services that our students need, right? And that's why supposedly, right, like we're putting a lot of emphasis on evidence-based methods, evidence-based methodologies. But our organizations, our institutions continue to look to the continent for these answers as if we're unable to create these evidence-based methodologies on our own. Ones that are informed with the specific context of our local communities. All right, what are the root issues? Okay, we're still in the what. What if market-based education is causing students to disengage from compulsory education by creating cultural dissonance? What if the way that we are educating our students around market-based goals, market-based values like individualism and meritocracy, what if those are creating conditions that are having our students disengage from education? And this is what the data shows us, right? I challenged this idea that economic advantage was a leading indicator. So I looked at low SES NHPIs and low SES non-NHPIs. Low SES non-NHPIs were scoring at twice the amount of the NHPI students. I saw nearly the same thing when I looked at high SES. High SES non-NHPIs are nearly twice high SES NHPIs. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker, guys. We had low SES non-NHPI students outscoring high SES NHPI students. And so we start to see that these cultural differences are stronger indicators than economic advantage. And that's super important because we can do something about that. If we know better, we should do better, right? Heike ana yai kapono. Here's what it looks like, just, you know, for those of you that have mathematical minds, we got to quantitate this. Okay, here's what achievement gap looks like. So now when I take the low SES scores and subtract them from the high SES non-HPI scores, that's what we call the total advantage. That was the maximal distance between NHPIs and non-HPIs. When I take the scores of the low SES NHPIs and I subtract them from the high SES NHPI students, I was able to isolate the economic advantage and minimize the cultural differences, right? Because they're both NHPI students. When I subtracted high SES NHPI from high SES non-NHPI, I was able to isolate the cultural differences and minimize the economic differences, right? They're both at high SES. And in every case, in all core 4 subjects, the cultural dissonance was a higher predictive indicator than economic advantage. Okay, so that's just the what. If we're talking about what are the root issues, right? We can't just say, well, more wealthy kids are going to do better in school. That's just how it is, right? And we were able to debunk that. This is another slide that I borrowed from Bella and Gail, and it takes a look at adverse childhood experiences. I love this photo for a couple of reasons, but I want to add to this, right? It shows that, you know what, the root issues are down here. Adverse community environments. This whole process could be looked at colonization, but here's the issue. What I believe the issue is, right? These things down here, violence, poor housing quality and affordability, lack of opportunity, economic, community disruption, discrimination, poverty, these things just aren't natural. Roots just don't rot because it's a bad tree, right? What's nourishing this system? Is it individualism and meritocracy, or hot breath? This idea that belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being, and health, if those are what we believe are important, and we're creating conditions for those things to thrive, for those experiences to be make contact with our students and our teachers and everybody in our learning environment, then we believe the roots are going to be good. They're going to be pa'a, yeah, and they're going to give life to that liko, to that pua, to that hua. All right, so how, right? We now know what the root issues are. How do we start to address these things? Well, the data shows us, and this is just through the context of the Department of Education, that language and culture-based education are providing protective factors against all that data I just showed you, okay? At Kaiapuni schools, our Hawaiian language immersion schools that focus on culture and language, they have higher passing rates in all core 4 classes. You can see in language arts, 7th through 11th, all higher. Math, 8th through 11th. Science, grades 8th through 11th. Social studies, 7th through 11th, right? All higher passing rates. Now, we look at this as learning because we're not supposed to be teaching to the test. So when we talk about what teachers expect, the curriculum that teachers are engaging their students in, we feel like passing rates is better than proficiency rates at that point. What we saw is for NHPI students, right? We saw an improvement in passing rates for those 4 classes. Here's the cool thing. For non-NHPI students, there was an improvement in passing rates, right? We believe what is good for Hawaii is good for all. If you increase hot breath for one, it's good for all. Here's another huge finding in our data, right? When you see those yellows, okay, where they're yellow in math and science, that is where low SES NHPI students low SES NHPI students at Kaiapuni schools passed at higher rates than their non-NHPI, their high SES non-NHPI students in the public school system. So where we saw 45% achievement gap in that total advantage, something about language and culture-based schools is erasing that total advantage, right? To where we can actually see low SES NHPI students performing at higher rates than high SES non-HPI students. This is just kind of how we measure, right? Like we talked about Mo'olelo as a navigational process, which is an assessment, right, for us. So we have 4 standards of PAR, and this is the idea that we're creating community-based collective decision-making. There's collective participation, there's pono and reciprocal relationships, that the relationship between us and our schools is not going to be extractive, that there's a commitment to the iterative process, right? To that, like, we're not going to hold schools accountable for 1 year. Like we know that school improvement and learning improvement is a process, and that we need to reiterate that there's a shift of power and ownership, where when we introduce an assessment process, we want the schools to take ownership of them. We want them to be able to define not only their where, why, what, and how, but also the standards of success that they attribute to those reflections. As we go through this process, we say review, reflect, and renew. We go through this storytelling and story catching, whether it's assessments, whether it's going to the schools. We want the schools to be able to do the same thing. Look for the stories, look for the mo'olelo in your community, catch them. Look for the indicators of success. Reflect on those. Make connections to different stars, different data points, and then strengthen those outcomes by reiteration, right? By going through meeting with your community stakeholder groups and understanding that where, why, what, how, and how do we, and part of that how is how do we move forward and improve or strengthen those outcomes. So that's really it. The only thing I would say is for this participatory praxis, for each of you and wherever you are at, whatever your area of expertise is, wherever your spheres of influence are, whose voices are missing from this mo'olelo? Have you decided for yourself that you're even ready to get in the va'a? Can you be successful? Are you qualified, right? And it's okay to go through this and say, you know what? I need to get in the va'a, and there's things I'm going to work on as we go, whether it's my rhythm, whether it's my power, whether it's my stroke, I don't know. But whether we're looking at a sprinting canoe or the hokulea, there are different roles and responsibilities in that va'a that other folks can help you fill. Yeah. So I don't know. I think I want to ask Gail and Bella to jump in with me here and maybe help facilitate. I'd love to get to know folks and understand their where, why, what, how. If they're in the va'a, whether they decided they're not ready to be in the va'a, and then if so, like who's in the va'a with them, and then who's missing, right? So, mahalo.
Mahalo, Kealiʻi, thank you so much. Okay, that's, yeah, incredible. Okay, may I make one clarification? I have all these side chats going on with people. But one person did ask me to clarify the Kaiapuni schools. So I just want to mention that Kaiapuni schools are schools here in Hawaii that are in Hawaiian language, and they're public schools. So they're public. There are some charter schools also that are exclusively in the Hawaiian language, but most of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on the, and Kealiʻi, correct me if I'm wrong, most Kaiapuni schools are public schools, correct? Or if not all. And there's no like qualifications to get in or whatever. It's open to everyone, correct?
It is open enrollment. However, we currently have
Waitlisting.
a shortage of 100 teachers. So we're short 100 teachers right now. So our ability to expand and to offer enrollment to students is currently restricted by capacity. Yeah. Another thing is that, when you listen to that mo'olelo of the one parent, oftentimes there's Kaiapuni education up till 6th grade. And then if the student wants to continue on in middle school and high school, many have to commute upwards of an hour to 2 hours away to participate in that education. And that's what's kind of crazy too. When we look at the data around Kaiapuni students, we have higher attendance rates. We have better behavioral rates. Like I'd be upset if I had to sit in a car 2 hours every day. Or how am I making it to school unless it's really, really important to me, at a higher rate when I have to commute 45 minutes to 2 hours. And so those are why some of that data reflects higher student engagement.
Mahalo for sharing that. And so Kealiʻi, if you wouldn't mind, if you could stop sharing just so that we can see everyone. Is that okay, guys? And if maybe they want to see something else, if you can put it back up. But we do want to offer this time. We have a little bit of time still, and I know there's a lot of people on here probably, you know, have questions or want to make comments, and so we want to open up this part of just talk story with each other, with Kealiʻi, anybody else who's on the call. So please go ahead and you may unmute yourself or use the chat, and I'm not really that tech savvy, but I gonna pay attention to the chat too, so that we can have a kind of discussion talk story time. So if anybody does have questions, please go ahead, unmute yourselves. How's it, Uncle Herb? Uncle Herb is here. Aloha. So yeah, so is that okay, Gail? We just turn it
Yep.
over. Yep. All
Yep.
right.
It's for everyone now.
Yes.
And I can watch the chat too.
Thank you. So go ahead, guys, use the chat or unmute yourselves and let's talk story about all this amazing info.
And I want to encourage folks, if you don't have questions for me, that's even better, but maybe being able to share your where, why, what, or how, I think would allow us to understand your work, and then also maybe how we're able to collaborate, and whether there's room in the va'a for some of us to help. So mahalo.
All right, so if it's okay, I'm going to read one question in the chat from Shelly, and she's asking, do the Kaiapuni and non-Kaiapuni take the same test?
So historically, students who learned in the Hawaiian medium language, right, at Kaiapuni immersion schools, were beholden to English proficiency tests, which we thought was not right. We thought that students should be tested in the language that they learned in. And so we've implemented the Ka'eo assessment test, which is a proficiency test in language arts, mathematics, and science in Olelo, Hawaii. So it is, and that had to meet the standards of the federal government. So. Common Core assessment, no, not in Olelo, Hawaii. The only test that we have, the only standardized test that we have in Olelo, Hawaii right now is Ka'eo, and then I think it's for 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, and then high school. Well, we're going to be rolling it out to high school. So yes, Ka'eo is federally funded, and so we had to pass the federal standards for that, which I think was kind of cool because we were the first ones. I think there are a few Native American tribes that are trying to do the same thing.
So Suzanne is saying, how can more teachers how can we get more teachers in Kaiapuni so that we can expand in the future?
Yeah, great question. So part of it is going through this process, figuring out that where, why, what, and how, and understanding that our kapuna have always used this process towards innovation, right? That our language and our cultural practices were always meant to figure out how for ourselves and apply it to the contemporary. So when we faced COVID, it was a time of huluhia for everyone, right? But it also created momentum. It created funding. The inequity that we saw existed before COVID, right? But it became like even more pronounced. For example, we didn't have a distance learning platform, and recognizing that there was more than likely a huge lawsuit on the current horizon, we were asked to build a distant learning program as we flew, right? Like we walked in and it was like, boom, get it done. We're in the middle of the first semester, creating it, getting students enrolled, and then trying to build for it the second semester. And so as part of some congressional appropriations funding, there was innovation money, and the Kaipuni distance learning became a perfect awardee, if you will. And so here were our thoughts. It's like, oftentimes our po'okumu are so inundated with issues, whether they're facility issues, capacity issues. And I remember asking them, like, what is all of this impacting your ability to message why Kaipuni? And all of them said yes. Like all of these issues and problems, like were affecting their ability to communicate with families. Why come and be a part and participate with Kaipuni? And in my eyes, that means we're not building capacity. We're so focused on the problems, we're not building capacity for more teachers through the education of our own students. And so our thought is that, what if we can create a teaching academy through this distance learning program, because we want to have optimal number of students have access to this. And then, the legislature has just passed money to pay students now for internships and mentorships. But what if we start to allow students to master their narrative, master their craft, and get that bug early, right? With like a pathway, we talk about CTE pathways, college pathways, matriculation pathways, with a pathway that leads to guardianship, that leads to the sustainability of our language, our culture, our aina. So those are the ways that we're looking at investing in creating more schools, is kind of like through this grow your own type of process, but like institutionalizing it, right? That's always the problem. It's like, oh yeah, we have value for it, but we're not going to invest in it. We're not going to measure the results of our values. That becomes probably problematic for the system as it has been before. So, we're hoping that will become one. I think the other issue is that we need to do a better job, the DOE and our university system, in like communicating. Like right now, we have teacher education programs, we have educational leadership programs that never talk to us, or we don't talk to them one way or another. But they're filling our schools with teachers and principals without access to our data, without access to what we're doing currently, so that they can build upon our initiatives in the college professional classrooms. So I think that as part of that answer too, is that we need to do a better job in messaging, like pupukahi holomua ne'epapa, like coming together in unity and moving forward as a system, getting all of those stakeholder groups together, much like this presentation really is about. So
Kealiʻi, can I also make a comment about that too? Because I know that you did share the beautiful Kaiapuni results of Kanaka Oiwi kids that are Native Hawaiian in education in Hawaii, and looking at that Kaiapuni space and seeing the differences between. But also, I want to mention that you're saying that this is good for all. So it's not just so I don't want to just like say that only Kaiapuni, like this is good for all schools, all kumu, which goes back to your last comment about the lack of, education for the kumu that's coming into our systems that have no idea about this data, that don't feel, we just came off for that beautiful call that you had, and your students who, could have lived here all their lives, but this, engaging with OHE, Office of Hawaiian Education, was the first time they actually learned about Hawaii. I mean, how crazy is that? That we are immersed in this island, we live here, we born, raised here, but know nothing about the culture of the host people. And I think that is all, like, that permeates, because 80% of Kanaka are in public schools throughout Hawaii. And so what you're saying, really, I think the message also is that what Kaiapuni kids have, and maybe you might want to reiterate those things that they have, like they have language, they have culture. My best friend put her keiki in as a first grader, and every day he comes home and he olis, and he's teaching her and her family the oli because he's at Kaiapuni. But can we teach oli at the regular public school? Absolutely, right? Can we teach history, right? Is that kind of...
So the way we look at it, I mean, I would take us back to that picture of the tree, and then the rain. The rain is the inputs, like the values, the conditions that we create. That's the inputs. To be honest, language, cultural practices, those are the vehicles. Those are vehicles that our values are carried in as they participate in it. When they participate in the language, and they participate in those cultural practices. What is the intentionality when we sit down and do this? What are the reasons why we do this? Those are all the very, very important values that are now embedded and hopefully measured as part of the application, or the application of knowledge and the demonstration of knowledge, right? It's not just the product. And I think that is the piece that when we see that non-Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are improving and strengthening outcomes, it's because of the inputs, right? So yeah.
Mahalo. We did have another question. Thank you. Kaz Hibb said, interesting data, eye-opening for her. Thank you. Are there ways to capture and value data beyond language arts, math, and science?
Oh my God, best question ever.
And then Uncle Herb, you're next. Okay, Uncle Herb has his hand up.
Fellow nerd, where are you? So absolutely. Here's the thing. We just got delivered a strategic plan for the Department of Education, and we've had a lot of those during COVID. And I remember there were two specifically: ESSER funding strategies, 311, and on the first page of each it said HA is our foundation. But then you look at all the measurements down in the last 10 pages, and not one of them are going to measure sense of belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being in Hawaii, right? So we got to create, we created our own, right? We have the Pu'ele Kula, which is the HA Campus Climate Survey. That is just a tool that our schools could take and customize and do what they like. We have schools right now that are using Unruler, which is amazing. It's a social media platform basically for closed, secure campuses that the whole school community members, family members can just post and share about, like, what learning, what teaching and learning smell like, taste like, feel like. And then they have, they have the data tools that show, hey, belonging showed up this much, responsibility this much, excellence this much. And by the way, this INA-based activities seem to improve responsibility the most for students out of all of these activities, blah, blah, blah. Like, incredible data. Who knew? But like, that's part of the thing about getting in the vault. We don't even trust our own owl. We trust the Panorama quantitative survey that was put together in Colorado or whatever. All those implicit values that come with those assessments, none of it is specific to our students in this place. So yes, thank you for that question. And there's other ones too. We have Aina Ulu, we have the CAF, and there's such cool ways to look at the data. You don't have to look at it just from the touchy-feely. If you don't like, you want to do SWOT analysis, you can do a SWOT analysis. Look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then do a gap analysis and figure out how you get from the current outcome to your desired outcome. And do that with your community stakeholder groups. Measure them. Like, I just challenge us to quit asking how and figure out how for ourselves. Yeah, but it takes, it takes a
Uncle Herb, you had a mana'o question, or Nina, or
I was trying to figure out how to enter into the conversation because I have like 100 thoughts going on simultaneously in my mind. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Kealiʻi for sharing the mana'o and giving that historical perspective. I think probably the best way for me to enter is maybe some people. I know some of the names I don't know that's on this call. But I want to enter the conversation from the perspective of a steward of a cultural place. So behind me in my picture is Waikaluloko Fish Pond. We've been restoring it for 27 years now, just a little over one generation. She's 14 generations old. And I mention that because over that course of time, we've had a very unique perspective because we have engaged very prolifically with schools and community. So we've had, and I think maybe now 6 years ago, we went over the 100,000 mark in terms of being a place to learn, get a cultural foundation, and also, we went through a process of designing in those days, what was called culture-based curriculum to teach math, science, social studies, language arts, that kind of a thing. So the point is that we've had exposure to public schools, private schools, home schools, charter schools, all of them, and over a 25-year period. And I think, to me, the core of this conversation is that we have to make the change that's needed is an institutional change, right? That we're looking at, and those ships don't change overnight. And so my point is that there is a gamut, the Kaiapuni schools, I was involved with Malama Honua public charter school in Waimanalo. They're a Hawaiian focused school. They're about, I think, 17 of about half of the charters are Hawaiian focused charter schools as well. They don't teach in Hawaiian language, but just short of teaching in Hawaiian language. And I aloha and I love all of them because I think they're all contributing in their own way to move the needle and move the ship in terms of transforming how we teach our kids in the context of Hawaii and our indigenous people and the wisdom that comes with that. My big point is getting to, and one of the things that when Auntie Verlie and Melina Wright was still alive, and we got to a point where we started to, just like you guys are asking questions now, we got to a point where we felt that we needed to, in order to make that institutional change, we needed to change the parameters of how we assess learning. And that the way that we assess learning with the paper pencil test that we've all known for hundreds of years, it feels like it, doesn't work for how we want to do education and how we are doing Aina-based education in the 21st century. So there's a cadre of people that we call ourselves KREA Hawaii. It stands for Culturally Responsive Evaluation and Assessment. And we've been together maybe for a little less than 10 years now. And we partnered with some people on the mainland, University of Illinois, which really started KRIA. But the essence of KRIA is to really look at, Hawaiian indigenous methodologies. And as Kealiʻi said, let's be masters of our own destiny and create a holistic evaluation methodology that can more accurately assess learning, in many different ways, not just the paper pencil test. And I believe that we're far from that. We're getting closer. We're inching. I feel like we're inching every year. And in some ways, I think the pandemic has accelerated that inching process, because I think people understand even more than ever the value of utilizing Hawaii as the greatest community classroom on the planet, taking kids outside to learn in the aina, because it's way safer than, and it's not to disparage a four-walled classroom. We need to find the balance. We need to find a lokahi, but we are still far short of being able to connect our kids to the aina. And I think we have a lot more momentum that we've ever had in the last 25 years that I've been involved in this. And some of the leaders are in this call right now. So I just wanted to put that out there, to look at that idea of looking at a more holistic, culturally relevant evaluation methodology, to look at the whole child and how they learn, and not just in the 6 hours when they go to a school, but look at it comprehensively and empower these families and kids to take more ownership of their learning. And we have the technology now to be able to do that. So all of these kids that are doing wonderful things in the aina, to be able to artifact all of that learning for themselves, and contribute that as part of their learning, and for us to figure out ways of how we can enhance that, credit that, and inspire these kids to be the best that they can be throughout, the P20 process. So I just want to kind of just state that that's sort of like the first, something to consider. And, we don't, again, not all knowledge going to one school, right? Only Paukaike. So, we don't have all the answers yet, but I think, if we get good data out of good assessments, then, then I think things will flow and move much better for everybody's sake.
There's nothing to respond to in that, but I have to, this has been this is a full circle moment for me. So a couple things. One, I believe that we do have all the answers as a collective. The problem is that we don't get together as a collective to figure out what they are, right? We don't collect, we don't story catch enough. We don't listen to each other's stories enough to put all of those things together. And here's an example. So I don't know if I've been misquoting you, okay? But the funny thing is I've been quoting you for a while now. And so you can tell me if I've been misquoting you, but a good friend of mine says, yeah, Uncle Herb Lee says, you malama what you have relationships for, or relationships with, yeah? So I wanted to say that that is so important in this work, right? When you talk about the local there's a couple things. One, if you're going to be a stewardship of that place, you should know the mo'olelo of that place. When I went to the CNHAs and the general of the Navy is sitting up there and he's talking, he's like, but I'm going to learn this, and we're going to take responsibility. You cannot take responsibility if you don't know the mo'olelo of your, the legacy of your own occupation, right? And it's not our kuleana to tell you. You have to know it. So that's just one thing that struck me as you're talking, is if we are to be stewards, we have to take stewardship of the mo'olelo. And then if we truly want to build relationships between Hawaii and our students, then we need to give them access. And here's what's crazy. I don't know, I'm with the DOE, we're going through, we get $10 million from ESSER funding because They need to shore up all these gaps that Kaipuni did not have, right? It's one of 2 state languages, and so we need to create equity. And so we have a preferred providers list of all these community-based organizations where students could have the opportunity to come and have INA-based project learning. And those community-based organizations that are on our preferred providers list don't know how to get access to students, and the students and the teachers and the schools don't know how to get access to the community-based organizations. So we just started going out like, hey, look, we got funds for this. They're on the preferred providers list. Let's, I think with Ko'ulu Akalana, for example, like you're gonna do 3 programs in the summer to make up for the gap and the loss of learning with language and everything else. We're in. We want to help. Like, Kealiʻi our director wants to get these resources out to our communities, get out into the community-based organizations, to get our students on INA. Because it's like, what point is all these tools if our kids can't access them? So yeah, anyways, mahalo, Uncle. I think like all of that just kind of resonates with me. One, that we need to get together more as a collective and figure out our mo'olelo, to be stewards of our mo'olelo, know our mo'olelo, share our mo'olelo. Yeah, and work on those relationships. But anyways, thank you, mahalo. It's good to finally, like, I know we didn't physically meet, but it's weird that I've been quoting you all this time and it hasn't even been from like the literature. It's like, I've been, Uncle Herb Lee said this. No one's ever called me out. He's like, oh, Uncle Herb Lee? Nope, I don't know. So anyways.
You're welcome to come down anytime. We got to get together. So yeah, definitely. We have the wisdom, we have the ability to bridge these, create these bridges between the indigenous ways and the contemporary ways. And the problems that we're facing today in our INA, food sovereignty and sustainability is huge for me right now. We have it, but no one of us can do it alone. We need the collective, and a lot of people have been trying some really great things, and we don't even know what they are, and how can we amplify that, and how can we support that,
But one of the things that we've seen, take Native Hawaiian males, for example, we've seen that suicide attempts are much higher in 7th grade and 12th grade. It's those transition points for our Hawaiian males, right? And it's this confidence that that they can make impact and master a craft and this and that. The local IA and other community-based organizations allow our Haumana, allow our Keiki, allow our Kanaka to apply and demonstrate knowledge, to apply and demonstrate kuleana. And I think that kind of goes to the question before, because, and what you were saying, Uncle Herb, because as I think of like we used the story of Ke Kuhopio when we started to look at like, what does sustainable a'o look like, right? And it's funny, we talked about like content and the delivery of content, but like when you look at Ke Kuhopio's dad, and he's very engaged in his son's education, you never hear him say, I want him to be the best spearsman ever. I want him to be the best warrior ever. No, he says, I want him to find an ali'i that he loves and who loves him because of great service. Like the mastery of his craft, the aloha, the sense of excellence, all of that. That is why the ali'i is going to love him. And then you go to Ko'aya, who's like his lua instructor, and you never hear Ko'aya say, "Oh, I want Ke Kuhopio to be the best lua practitioner ever. I want him to kick everybody's butt." No, if anything, he was most worried about Ke Kuhopio's proficiency. He was worried that this person might abuse their knowledge and oppress the people. his hope, his desired goal and outcome for Kekuaupio was to protect Lahui, right? And so that was the demonstration. That was the application. Like, you know, it's funny. I coached my son's football for a long time until I just could not. But I remember his freshman year, his position coach says, he brings in the Kekuaupio story. So, you know what? Kekuaupio, he jumped in the water. He had courage, and he fought the man-eating shark on his own territory, and won. And so, you know, wanted to have the maka as like part of the boys. Every time they had a good play, they put a shark maka on their head, right? And it was funny because I waited till later and I talked to my son. I says, you know what? Here's the other story. Here's the other perspective I want you to think about. If you look at the Kekuaupio story and that part specifically, why do you think Ko'aia wanted him to jump in the water and kill a shark? What does that have to do with Hawaiian martial arts, right? My son's like, I don't know. I says, what if I asked you to take your algebra and apply it to to our mala, right? So, well, I wouldn't know what, I wouldn't know how. I says, why? So, well, because I never done it before. I says, okay. I says, I think what Kauai is doing is trying to get him to apply knowledge in unfamiliar contexts. I also think like he wants him to have confidence in his preparation, not just blind courage. You know, it's like football, like, just go and hit him. No, Kauai slowed him down. He was going to do that. Kekuaupio was going to jump in the water. He holds him and says, hold on. Kilo, what's going on? Kekuaupio watches. Every time the shark comes out of the water to grab the bait, like it's swallowing water, and its hope was getting bigger and bigger. And so Kekuaupio goes, oh, if I wait, I let him swallow enough ocean water, he's gonna be sluggish, and then I can get him. That's right, that's what he did. He's just like, observe, learn from your environment, learn from, you know. So it's those types of things that are most frustrating for me in working with students or even adults today, right? Like we do PD with teachers, and it's always, oh yeah, we get breath, we love those values. Just how? Show us how. How is not my, like I think about my own grandfather. Like if I had asked how, I knew not to ask how. If I asked how, he goes, what do you mean how? Watch, learn, try them. That's how. Like it was almost like being mentally lazy was worse than being physically lazy kind, right? But that's what we're dealing with today. And so I think our biggest challenge, you know, I look through all these questions, our biggest challenge for me is coming to leaders like everyone here, getting them to recommit to values they already have, and then maybe making it uncomfortable for them to stay in those neutral spaces. Yeah, like I said, like Heike Aniyai Kapono. Now that you know better, you know, we kind of got to do better. So anyways, yeah, mahalo, Uncle. Sorry, you took me on a tangent. Sorry.
That was an awesome tangent. Mahalo, Uncle Herb. And all right, we have just a few more moments, a few more minutes before we're gonna close. Again, mahalo nui for being here, everybody. Does anybody have any closing questions or remarks or mana'o before we turn it over to Gail to kind of close us out this afternoon? Anybody have some outstanding things they want to say? All right, we got some mahalos in there. All right, Kealiʻi, you want to share maybe a few last thoughts, and then I'll turn it over to Gail as she can close us out. All right, we have one question. Can Dr. Kukahiko tell us his favorite mo'olelo or olelo no eao? Oh yeah, I want to know that too.
You know, to be honest, I have a bunch, but I feel like the one that I've been focusing on the most now is the one I've already been sharing with you guys. It's I think to me, it's the belief that, you know, we got a lot of folks in our system who all of us work with that have who have like mindsets. They want to do right, but for some reason or another, it's enacting them that is the issue. Yeah. And I think I don't know what it is. I mean, I think all of us have to go on that journey on our own to figure out, like, for me, I just don't sleep well. Like, if I know I'm supposed to do something and I don't do it, then I just know. That's why I do it. And I'm probably like, I know I have like impulse issues. I just go do them. But part of that is because at some point I just have to trust my na'au and we just go, you know? And I don't spend a lot of time in the rearview mirror, you know? I still hope that I can see Kahiki. And I cannot do that for sure if I'm always in the rearview mirror questioning whether I made the right decision or not, you know? So yeah, heike ana yai kapono for me. It just kind of simplifies my life for me. Allows me to go and then, you know, I look at it like this whole iterative process we're talking about. Like, hey, sometimes I'll get it right, sometimes I'll get it wrong. I generally don't change direction. I just might change the how. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. I'm pretty sure I took up a lot of oxygen, so I've really nothing else to share.
We're so grateful to you, Kealiʻi. That was amazing. And to everyone who joined us today. One of the things that Bella and I have been doing, our kuleana, is to provide trauma-informed information to our community as part of Compassionate Ko'olapoko. And the question that we offer to the places that we go and offer information is, we offer a question as, what does trauma-informed schools in Hawaii look like? Not just a trauma-informed school. So we want people to start thinking about this information and who they need in their wa'a to make the changes that are necessary. So this conversation was amazing. What a wonderful start. And that our hope is that we will continue to have these conversations among ourselves and in the schools, in the community, on how can we help our community become stronger and more resilient, and really taking a strong look at the cultural piece as well. It's critical. It's looking at those roots that we got to look at. So thank you so much for today, and to everyone who came and contributed and offered their mana'o.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, guys. Okay, so we're at the close of our beautiful speaker series this month. Again, mahalo nui for joining us. If you popped in late, if you came in early, if you however you showed up, and particularly just your presence here was amazing. Again, to Kealiʻi, you the man. I love this guy. He's like amazing. This information to me, just again solidifies the work that we do and helps to paint the picture for the message. You know, it helps reinforce the message that we're doing as Gela and I go out into the schools. So you know, I know that you know, Ohe wants to be in the schools. So if you haven't had them in your spaces or in your school, please contact them. Ka'anohi was just saying that, you know, she hasn't been to Kaneohe Elementary, which is where I taught for so long. Like, we got to get you over there. So please do that. I did put a link in the chat to the Pu'alei Kula, which is the assessment tool from Office of Hawaiian Education. I know some of you guys are chatting and emailing, but please email Gail and I as well. I look forward to our next speaker series, which is coming up. Is that right, Gail? Yeah, October. We have a speaker series in October. Yeah, we do. So we'll be sending that out. Yeah. So we'll be sending that information out to all of you. Anything else, Gail, that we want to say before we let these beautiful people go?
No, we do have a couple more things coming up. Probably from Liliuokalani Trust, and then we'll be having a book study for Nana Ikikumu as our next book, and we'll be sending out more information about that soon. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Aloha.